everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this online lecture on the job of interpreter. I am Ashwini Lama, and I'm a program officer here at the Japan Foundation Toronto. We are joined today by our guest speaker, Ms. Chieko Bond, who is a Canadian government accredited conference and simultaneous interpreter. We thank her for being here with us tonight to share her insights and experiences. After the presentation from Ms. Bond, we will have about 15 minutes for audience questions and answers. We encourage you to post your questions on the YouTube chat section. Kindly type in your questions in either English or Japanese. Ms. Bond may answer some questions during her presentation, and the rest will be answered during the question and answer session at the end. Please note that we will be posting today's live stream on our YouTube channel at a later date for future reference. As always, after the event, I would like to request you to please fill out our digital questionnaire, a link to which can be found in the description box below and will also be sent to you via email after the event. Your feedback is very important to us and will help us in creating future programming. Now, to welcome Ms. Bond and to introduce us to today's topic, I would like to invite our Executive Director, Ms. Noriko Yamamoto.
Great pleasure to welcome you all to the online lecture tonight with a guest speaker, Ms. Chieko Bond. With so many people speaking multiple languages in Canada, a little bit of interpreting can be a daily occurrence for many residents. Interpreters play a vital role in culture exchange, and we have been fortunate to have their help at our events as well. While concerns and curiosity about the impact of artificial intelligence on human interpreters often comes up in this era of new technology, the significance of this profession in bridging people is undeniable. Needless to say, the work of interpreters is not just limited to cultural exchange and is essential in many areas and contexts. In response to the interest of many about interpreting as a profession, Ms. Bond, who has been at the forefront of the industry for many years, will share her experience as well as her insights about the current state of the English-Japanese interpreters in North America today. Ms. Chieko Bond is a Canadian government accredited conference and simultaneous interpreter. Her career as an interpreter started in Japan and has expanded in Canada. She has interpreted for prime ministers and cabinet ministers at the bilateral and multilateral meetings, including G7 and G20 summits and ministerial meetings. She has also interpreted for negotiations of agreements between Canada and Japan and worked in all continents at public and private international conferences, business meetings, investor relations, and audits, and so forth. Ms. Bond also works as a translator and has various other roles outside of the interpretation. It is an honor to have her here today, and we look forward to hearing about her experience and insights. So now, please welcome Ms. Chieko Bond.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm Chieko Bond. I would like to thank Ms. Noriko Yamamoto, Ms. Noriko Saito, and Ms. Yuki Hasegawa, and the staff of the Japan Foundation for this great opportunity to speak about interpreter as a job. I heard that many of the audience today have non-Japanese names, and therefore I will speak in English, though it is not my native language, and I would feel much more comfortable speaking in Japanese. Please bear with me and my accent for the next 80 minutes or so. Also, I will speak more generally about interpreter's job without focusing too much on technicality. This talk is prepared mainly for those who are considering or aspired to become an interpreter as their profession. and not so much for those who are already in the profession. Although the platform used today may make it difficult, I would like to make this event as interactive as possible. I would encourage you to post your questions in the chat section either in Japanese or English. And if I'm relaxed enough and can spot the questions, I will answer those during my talk. Otherwise, I would ask the Japan Foundation's help to kindly select some questions posted for me to answer during the Q&A session. First disclaimer. This talk is based on my own experience and some hearsay. This talk is from the perspective of an interpreter based in North America whose native language is Japanese. Interpreters with different background may have different perspectives, and I will not be presenting my views as the standard in the industry. Also, I am conscious of this session being recorded, and therefore I may stop short of speaking to the very point or of my personal opinions, but I will try my best to keep you awake. I would like to introduce myself and my background, hoping it will help you to grasp the context of my talk. My grandfather emigrated to Peru, and my father was born in Peru. And during the World War II, his family was interned in the US. It is an interesting story itself, and I hope someday I can share this story with you. The family was interned in Soko, the model camp in the United States, and treated relatively well and decided to return to Japan after the war. I grew up living with my grandparents, and therefore, difference between the continental culture and Japanese culture was a regular topic of our family discussion, mostly through the lens of my mother, who grew up in Japan. My father spoke both Spanish and English and stressed the importance for me to learn English when I was younger. He taught me English and gave me an English tutor who happened to be a professional interpreter. I studied English literature at the university in Japan and worked for Mazda, Ford, and the Ontario government Tokyo office. After working as a freelance interpreter and translator in Tokyo for a year, I moved to Toronto. Right after I moved to Toronto, I was accepted at the Master's in Political Science at U of T, but dropped the course after I obtained the status to work in Canada. As I was not interested in working for Japanese companies in Canada, I started working as a freelance interpreter. After a while, I was accredited by the Canadian federal government as a conference interpreter. With the credential, I worked with prime ministers and other ministers, worked at the G7, G20 meetings and government talks and working level meetings. I also work at international conferences and the corporations, and my job takes me to all over the world. I never thought of becoming a professional interpreter and always wanted to do something else. I also been consulting from time to time, and I started the virtual business accelerator in Japan with my partners and worked as a consultant during the pandemic years. My consulting work was related to introducing startup companies to Japan and promoting innovation in Japanese SMEs. To gain more insight, I obtained a master's degree in management in entrepreneurship and innovation during the pandemic years as well, while working. This experience is not directly related to my interpretation job, but truly helped me to deepen and widen my understanding. Other interpreters may not agree, but I think having work and study experience outside of the interpreter's profession is a real plus. Without further ado, I would like to start focusing on today's subject. First, about becoming an interpreter. Many interpreters in North America became an interpreter by default, and I am one of them. Some are already interpreters in Japan and moved to North America. When the first generation interpreters were active in North America, the oldest one is about 90 years old or older. There were not many professional jobs for Japanese women, particularly, and they became interpreters. Just from my own observation, there are more female interpreters than male in Japanese and Korean languages, while there are many male interpreters in other languages, possibly due to differences in culture, syntax, or social norms. It is considered to be easier to interpret among English and European languages, as their syntax is similar, and interpreters can basically replace words in another language by the order spoken. That is not the case in Japanese interpretation. We need to hear the whole sentence to find what the verb is in Japanese, meaning we don't know whether the speaker is indicating positive or negative until they finish speaking. This is problematic, particularly in simultaneous interpretation. To overcome this difficulty, interpreters need to synchronize our thinking with that of the speakers to anticipate what is coming. Female brains might be more empathetic, allowing female interpreters synchronize with the speakers easier, but this is just my speculation and nobody knows. Please do not take this as a sexist comment. It all depends on individuals, of course. It's more like because of economic reasons. It would take a few years at least before being able to earn enough income to feed a family or themselves. And it may be harder for a man to take this path. In the United States, some younger interpreters are graduating from the Monterey Institute in California. They offer both undergraduate and graduate interpretation degrees. These days, there are many more attractive options available for young bilinguals, such as working for international organizations, investment firms, and consulting firms. Older interpreters are retiring one after another in the States. This may be creating a shortage of interpreters in the United States, but some younger interpreters are getting into the profession there. In Canada, there's a shortage of interpreters, particularly at the higher level. Excuse me. Now, is interpretation a good career? I did some Google search and find the following 5 points, seemingly put together by a bot. I assume those were mentioned at some point by a wide range of interpreters. They are, first, global opportunities, as our job requires us to travel. But what's to be noted is an interpreter need to reach at a certain level before being called for an overseas assignment. Number 2, remote work flexibility, which also allows us to travel while working. I sometimes do a Zoom from an airport or at the hotel I'm staying, or even during vacation. Cultural exposure, meaning while traveling, we experience diverse culture. Enhance networking opportunities with clients and colleagues. And lastly, can continuously improve our language skills through work. Aside from those, I find the following more relevant. First, interpretation jobs expose us with the most up-to-date themes and information. This means often we know the subject matter before they are widely reported. We can meet and work with people otherwise too important for us to meet, such as His Excellency the Emperor of Japan, heads of the states, major company presidents, and highly achieved experts. Further, we can go to places where otherwise we're not allowed to go, such as the Level 4 Federal Biolaboratory, NASA-related facilities, and so on. Sometimes I feel that I'm on a perpetual school trips. All the above privileges truly help broaden our perspectives and deepen our understanding. However, it comes with a price. It is like we are perpetually studying for an exam to pass on the day we need to perform. It is sometimes brutal, as it doesn't matter whether we are too tired or too busy, we just need to get well prepared. Here I listed the types of interpretation largely in the order of difficulty. Even if you're not an interpreter, you must have some experience of interpreting for friends and families. Although it is not easy, medical interpreter or criminal court interpreter are an entry type. I say these are entry type as they are not paid very much. Criminal court interpreters are accredited by the provincial government, and I will explain it in the next slides in more detail. The next step can be company internal or in-house interpreter. As there is a continuity in the subject matters, once you get used to the concept and terminology used in the company, you can be a part of the project team. This is a good exercise and training experience for relatively new interpreters. Interpreters can work at the business meetings as a freelancer. By this time, interpreters are usually sole proprietors or freelancers making living in this profession. In Canada, you must be accredited by the federal government to work on a federal file. These assignments are extremely difficult, even for accredited interpreters. The areas range widely from security, agriculture, tax, trade, to health, and more. We are called upon bilateral meetings or multilateral meetings, including the G7 and G20 meetings. Investor relations, or IR, is a very technical and unique type of interpretation field. Here, you must be very fluent in English, as I indicated that with red E. Sorry. So as Japanese executives present their company performance to the North American investors, you must perform really well as an interpreter here, as your performance can affect the share prices and investment decisions. People get really serious when money is involved. Another difficult assignment is in the area of investigations, litigations, such as Department of Justice investigation of price fixing, collusion, or patent litigations. You must be very good in English here again, as you'll be interpreting what Japanese corporate witnesses testify for record and under oath in depositions and discoveries. This is possibly the most difficult type of consecutive interpretation. Main interpreter's job is usually checked real time by another Czech interpreter. Finally, the most technically difficult type is simultaneous interpretation at international conferences. I assume you already know the differences between consecutive interpretation and simultaneous interpretation. For consecutive, a speaker would pause every few sentences for an interpretation. For simultaneous, we usually use a booth and sometimes use portable interpretation devices. With the virtual technology, both can be offered on a virtual platform now. I'm just trying to check on your questions. Okay, there is a question about how you can be accredited by the Canadian government. This is very hard for any interpreter because the interpreter has to be operational and can be placed to an extremely difficult assignment right away. So unless you have an extensive experience as working as both consecutive and simultaneous interpreters, it will be very, very difficult to pass. But you have to be patient and accumulate your experience. And I will be talking to speaking later on later slides, but the shortest way is go to an interpretation school. in Japan, such as SIMO and intergroups, offering simultaneous interpretation courses, or as I mentioned at the Monterey in California, that would be probably the shortcut. Okay, so I like to move on to the next one. So I guess this is the page. I would like to briefly explain some accreditation systems available in and outside of Canada. First, provincial accreditation. This is mainly for court interpreters, and almost anyone can pass this examination. The job is for a provincial criminal court or traffic and other minor offenses or family matters. The demand for Japanese interpreters for this is extremely low. Although fees are low, interpreters are expected to offer whispering, which is a type of simultaneous interpretation without equipment, and it is very challenging. But this will give you a very good opportunity to practice simultaneous interpretation for sure. Another one is the federal government accreditation. As I mentioned, this is extremely difficult to pass. You almost have to be perfect before passing the examination, and the examination is quite extensive. That includes both simultaneous and consecutive interpretation, going both from English to Japanese and Japanese to English. But compensation here is at the market rate. With this accreditation and security clearance, interpreters can work for any type of federal government assignments. Next, outside of Canada, there is the U.S. State Department accreditation. As you know, the Department of State is the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Canada. But this is not too difficult to pass compared to the Canadian accreditation. Here, as the compensation is below the market rates, some professional interpreters would choose not to work for the government assignments. And in Europe, there is the IIC accreditation by the International Association of Conference Interpreters. As the process is very complicated and needs an extensive support of other language interpreters, it is very difficult to obtain unless you are known in international conference fields. It is not much use for Japanese interpreters in North America to get this accreditation. IIC has strict restrictions on how their interpreters can work and collect dues and offers referral opportunities. There was a question, how can I find information about the market rate? This is a very tricky thing. I think you have to do some of your own intel. If you have an opportunity to speak with another interpreter or interpreters working in the States or Europe, you have to be very careful because talking about the rates will be something against the anti-collusion laws. But you can probably gently ask how much would be the standard charge or going rate, and that would be the only way to find out. Next, now what does professional interpreter mean? The following apply in general when we use the word professional in any occupation. Provide services for fee, first of all, and full-time job, meaning there is no need to have a second income source. And of course, act professionally. That includes behaviors, how you dress, and use professional language, follow professional code of conducts, including in confidentiality and document handling. Now, code of conducts are usually given by an accreditation body, such as the federal government and IIC in the examples in the last slide. Often, interpretation agencies have one in place in the form of a contract when you sign. In general, there are implicit code of conducts that interpreters should follow, And if they don't, the clients will either complain or stop giving you a job, or worse, interpreters may be sued for breach of confidentiality. I just spotted another question. Accreditation requirement same to all interpreters with any language. That is correct. In any language, they have the same style of examination. That is yes, that's the case. Before getting into details on interpretation, I would like to touch on some differences between English and Japanese that may be helpful in interpreting. As you already know, first on Japanese. Japanese speakers regularly omit the subject and object. Japanese is a sort of a Zen language, which is simple, indicating, vague, indirect, beating around the bush. The conclusion comes at the end, if any. Japanese is also a more poetic language, meaning sometimes it doesn't make sense, but phonetically it sounds really good. It is more beautiful when less is said in Japanese. If it is said too much, it could sound shitsukoi or annoying. Also, Japanese people feel uncomfortable being called anata or you. For example, in English it goes, you should fulfill your responsibility, which is totally normal in English. But if you interpret this in Japanese as あなたはあなたの責任を果たすべき。It sounds the person is being sharply accused with a pointing finger. This can be simply said, 責任を果たすべき, unless the speaker would like to especially stress on you and your responsibility. Once I was addressed as あなた or you by a Japanese who was raised in Canada in a Japanese conversation. This made the conversation sounded like a literal translation of an English statement and made me feel awkward. When I hear あなた or you, I image a pointing finger. When the Japanese need to address the other, they try to use the other's name in conversation, such as 千恵子さんはどこに住んでいますか? Phonetical and poetical beauty, rather than logic, can be more important for Japanese language. Therefore, often Japanese can be translated in English word for word. As a result, as the result for such interpretation or translation wouldn't make sense. On the other hand, we can more safely translate English into Japanese word for word. Though there are issues such as anata or making the translated to Japanese sentence tedious, as I mentioned. Remember, Japanese is a Zen language, which is not always logical. Further, there are chameleon phrases in Japanese, such as yoroshiku or domo. Yoroshiku is differently interpreted in particular context, such as thank you for looking after the project, or I would appreciate your support, or sometimes I look forward to working with you. And domo can mean thank you, I'm sorry, or something else. Just spotted another question. What are the characteristics of an unprofessional interpreter? I will touch on this at the later slide, but interpreters are paid to perform. So they have to do everything they can do, prepare themselves for the job. So I would say unprofessional interpreters, even though they are paid, and that is why they are called professional, but they do not prepare themselves, they do not study, and they are not ready for the work. That's what I would think. Now, next on English. English is much more logical language and requires the subject and the object in the sentence. English is more straight and clearer language compared to Japanese. Yes or no is clearer unless you are a politician. The conclusion comes at the beginning part in the sentence. Also, it matters if the subject is I, we, you, he, she, or they, as English language cares the full portion. So, from the statement, um, it is expected to figure out whose opinion is it, who has the ownership, who is responsible. In contrast, in Japanese, the who is often kept unidentified and vague, which is seen in the omission of the subject. Now, a little more about interpretation. First, what is important for interpreters? As I mentioned, there are differences in syntax between Japanese and English, which makes it all the more important to understand each of the languages spoken, as you need to understand what is said and reproduce it in another language of different syntax. You can't just replace word for word, particularly between Japanese and English. Of course, you need to be fluent in at least two languages. In multi-language conferences, the official languages among interpreters is often French. European language interpreters can almost always speak French, in addition to English and their own mother tongues. Unfortunately, I am a mere bilingual. When multi-language interpreters chat, they need to switch from French to English just for me. Still, I'm not motivated enough to study French. Fluency, however, is not enough in input and output in interpretation. The key is being able to understand the subject matter. Misinterpretation often comes from lack of understanding of the subject matter and the speaker's statements. You can't interpret well what you don't understand. To counter this challenge, you need to elevate your first language competency not only in vocabulary but in knowledge and experience, as the fluency in the second language is limited to the level of the first language. The key is you can't produce what you don't have in you. I would like to explain what is important for interpreters a little more in detail in the next slides. I'm just looking at some charts. Okay. Yeah. As one of the charts says, in consecutive interpretation, you would have an opportunity to clarify and verify your understanding, which is very, very important. But we cannot do it in simultaneous mode. So we just have to do our best, try to connect the stories. And then if we do notice that we made a mistake, at the later on, we have to correct ourselves. I'm sorry, the interpreter interpret in such and such, but I like to correct myself that it meant that way. So there may not be such an opportunity at the simultaneous mode, but maybe you can speak to the client at the later time during the break that you made a mistake. Okay. Now, did I cover this page? Okay. Now, first, I'd like to get into interpretation in more detail. First, about input. Interpreters are acting as a voice of speakers. Therefore, you need to have knowledge and experience of the speakers in a perfect world. About 30 or more years ago, there was a TV show called The Pretender. The hero, called Gerard, is an exceptional genius and can become expert through intensively studying the subject matter for a week or so. He can be a medical doctor, lawyer, pilot, banker, firefighters, or so on, and solve problems and crimes. I will share the trailer link, so please take a look. I like the character so much that we named our second son Gerald after him. So I don't know if I can do it. Maybe could I ask the Japan Foundation people to share this link with the audience? That would be great. Thank you very much. If you share the same or if not similar knowledge and experience with the speaker, you can understand what the speaker wants to say or why they are saying so instantly. Extensive studying of the subject matter is the key. And once meeting starts, you need to follow the logic of the discussions they are happening. And finally, you need to be able to write shorthand and have a good short memory for the purpose of output. This is the multitasking portion. You need to hear and understand the speaker and write down the points quickly, also memorizing at the same time. This is, of course, in a consecutive interpretation. There is no shorthand or memo taking in simultaneous mode. It is generally understood when everything is equal, older interpreters are better as they have more experience and knowledge, although some younger interpreters are brilliant. It may be a myth, but when I was 39 years old, an US agent asked my age. I was told that the client was looking for an interpreter over the age of 40. This is the industry where older age may be appreciated. Of course, it depends, and not always. Oh, I'm so glad that some knew the Pretender, and it was an amazing show, that's for sure. The other side of interpretation is output. You need to use the specific language and terminologies to convey exactly what is said with the speaker's intention. For easy example, the picture here is showing a slope along a road, which is called norimen. It is a word that normal citizens don't hear very often. I didn't know this word for sure. Also, in Japanese, foot and leg is pronounced ashi. The pronunciation is the same, but the kanji is different. In medical assignments, you would need to use kashi for leg, which is not usually used in daily life. You need to be able to speak with the tone of the speakers, but may prop it up when the speakers are lifeless, depending on the circumstances and a kind of type of meetings. Without intonation, ups and downs, a flat message may not reach to the audience. But don't misunderstand where and when to emphasize, as it may change the meaning. You need to be a communicator, but do not overdo it. You need to be able to speak clearly with good grammar in a logical way with little filler words such as well, things like that. But in reality, it is very difficult and very few, probably none, can do this. I was once told by a journalist, with a good interpreter, the listeners can take notes exactly in the way interpreted. Interpreters must always be neutral. Aside from international conferences where interpreters are hired by the organizer, interpreters are typically hired by one side. Interpreters are expected not to take a side and interpret precisely what is said and how it is said, keeping neutrality. There are mild exceptions, however. In the case of a company internal interpreter or in-house interpreter, they often act as a facilitator, filling cultural and understanding gaps. Therefore, they might offer some advice and comments during the meetings. When hired for negotiations by a company, interpreters can be well briefed by the company on the direction and towards which the company wants to bring the discussion. Because we are paid by the client to achieve their goals, we may be conscious about the goals and select the best option from several possible accurate ways to interpret an idea or concept for an output to help achieve the goals, the client goals. Therefore, for a client, the key for successful outcome is to hire your own interpreter and brief them well. But remember, interpreters are still bound by the code of conduct, and it is our duty to interpret truthfully. And I'm just looking at some of the comments. What do you think about working as a translator first before becoming an interpreter? Would that path be more successful? Depends, but I think working as a translator is a big help when you're working as an interpreter. In my case, I was doing a translation when I was working for a company, corporations, which was very helpful because translating is different from interpreting. You have some time to look up the dictionary, currently online, but back then I was using a paper type dictionaries and learn in a proper way. Interpretation, you can't really do it when you're interpreting, but translation you can. Many interpreters do both translation and interpretation, and they can complement with each other. So definitely, thank you. Now, when the interpreter is not confident or is nervous, it will make the client listeners nervous and suspicious. Some people are more nervous in nature, and some people love spotlights. But confidence comes from extensive experience and preparation, as well as personality traits. Interpreters often spend a week or more to prepare for 1 or 2 day job so that they become fluent with the subject matter and are even able to speak on the subject in their own language. Confidence and competency build trust between an interpreter and the client. Being trusted by the client makes the interpreter's job much easier. As you can see, interpreter's confidence produces a positive cycle of work environment and relationship. Modesty is the opposite of being confident, but interpreters need to have both modesty and confidence. An interpreter builds up experience and skills as they do. Their confidence may create an illusion that they know the subject well already, and they may study less and become less prepared for a job. Interpreters tend to make mistakes or their performance suffers when they are not fully prepared. Be always modest and study the subject matter and materials for a job. Some interpreters may exhibit an attitude that they are better than their client, as the client cannot speak another language. Particularly, some Japanese speakers are not very good communicators, even in their own language. Be respectful to the client and try to understand what they would like to convey. Being bilingual will not make you superior, or being a poor communicator does not mean that they are dumb. Try to help the communication by helping them convey their thoughts and knowledge. If you don't understand the speaker, ask them a question for clarification, but this is not possible in a simultaneous interpretation mode. Just checking for questions and comments. Okay, good. Personality matters. It's a service profession in the service industry. Present personality can be more valuable than higher skills. Clients are human, and they tend to like working with pleasant interpreters. Also, interpreters often work in a team. If you have an offensive or poor personality, the others don't want to work with you. You often get job referrals from our colleagues or are recommended as a partner to work with them. It is difficult to achieve the balance, but be modest and reflect on your behaviors as well as performance, but be confident when you interpret. Be thoughtful of your colleagues if you're working with them. I would like to give you some general ideas what traits and skills help you become a good interpreter. Of course, you need to be fluent in at least 2 languages. Growing up with 2 languages, such as in the case of Kikoku Shijo, who spent a chunk of early years in a foreign country, really helps and gives them an advantage. But that is not sufficient. You must like studying and researching on many different subjects. You should be curious and interested in knowing what's happening in the world. You must be quick, capable of instant understanding, and have ability to produce output. In a Japanese proverb, they say, 一を聞き、十を知る, or hearing one, understanding 10. But for interpreters, we must be able to 一を聞き、十を知り、百を語る, meaning hearing one, understanding 10, and speaking 100. Have a good short-term memory with a good mental storage capacity. Be able to focus for a long period of time and don't mind being a lone wolf as you're generally working as a proprietor or freelancer. Colleagues are great friends, but also competitors, so be tough. Be resilient when you fail. As we say, what's done is done, or 失敗を引きずらない, or always rising after a fall, or 七転び八起き. Some very talented people can't continue to work as an interpreter as they can't take failure and they won't want to face another failure ever again. Being able to move on for the next interpretation assignment and the next challenge is a necessary trait. Forgive yourself and move on. Be able to perform under pressure. Interpreters are like athletes. It's like mental sports. We need to have a nerve to perform and control our adrenaline level. Be modest when you are preparing for the job, but on the job day, you must think that you are the best or you are the king. So 準備の時は謙虚、本場の時は私が一番と思えるようにしたいです。Depending on the type of interpretation, what is required of interpreters can be different. But having good people skills would help you to build your business as an interpreter. Another question about the interpreter, translator. What would be the first step to be an interpreter? As I mentioned earlier, many interpreters start with being a corporate interpreters or in-house interpreters before becoming a freelancer. Working as a freelancer would take a long time until you start earning enough income unless you're supported by your husband, family, parents. So it is very tough. You have to go through, I wouldn't say difficult, but not profitable preparation time for quite a long time. But if you will start working for a company and become a company interpreter, then you can have income as well as obtaining experience. That would be probably the fastest way. Now, okay. The next message I want to send is, but no one is perfect. Generally speaking, no interpreter has it all. Of course, there are amazing interpreters who seem to have it all, and I'm not one of them. Find what type of interpretation is best fit for you, such as corporate interpreters or freelance interpreters, or probably the criminal court interpreters, just to gain some experience. As you accumulate experience, you can step up to the next stage. Interpreters make up for their weakness with their strengths, such as skills, precision, knowledge, experience, personality, being extra thoughtful. Every one of them, the interpreters that I know, complement their weakness with the strengths. Interpretation industry is also dictated by supply and demand and the market pricing. High-level interpreters do not want to take lower-paying jobs, but some newer interpreters may willing to take them, and they can gradually develop and build their skills and experience. So there is a job for everyone. The shortest way to become an interpreter, as I mentioned earlier, is go to one of the prominent interpretation schools, if you can. But it is not easy if you are based in Canada. The next subject is how to study the subject matters. Now, you would need to read newspapers, magazines, research papers widely. For example, I subscribe Global Mail, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Nikkei Business, Foreign Affairs, Nikkei Asia, Nikkei Crosstech, Nikkei Newspapers, MIT Technology Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and Reuters News, and more. I spend probably about $400 every month for the subscription. But there are free of charge materials available if you Google. And I believe NHK and CBC will really offer some good understanding of what's happening in the world on their websites. The best time to study is before and after an assignment. Read in both languages. When expected to interpret mostly from English to Japanese, make sure to read Japanese or output language document, such as website statements, declarations, etc. Not always provided. They're not always provided by the client. And sometimes we look for YouTube videos for non-speakers to get used to the way they speak. And we must create glossaries for each job and subject matter. We usually use Excel spreadsheet or Word. It really depends on the interpreters themselves' preference. So another question, have you experienced business meetings in which you were required to use 3 languages? I suffer from burnout and deterioration in code switching very quickly. Definitely. No, actually, not very many Japanese interpreters are trilingual. There is one person in Ottawa, my senior interpreter. She's really amazing. But we are sadly bilinguals, most Japanese interpreters. If we need French, sometimes in the federal assignment, they hire a French interpreter to do a relay in consecutive mode. That means if a French person spoke French, that is interpreted from French to English by a French interpreter, then I interpret from English to Japanese. So that's really just doesn't work. So I don't know. You're amazing to be a trilingual, and then I just have to say good luck. Now, shorthand is extremely important for consecutive interpretation. You need to always carry a notepad and a pen. Create your own style of shorthand. Write mainly keywords, not sentences. Use arrows and marks where possible. Writing down is only the first step. You need to reproduce the statements into another language. Speakers often speak for a few minutes before stopping for interpretation, and the following techniques will help. Here is the way I use to reproduce from my shorthand. As I take notes, I understand the storyline and how the story develops. I put the block of concept in a compartment drawer in my mind. I open the drawer one by one for concept to output interpretation as you move along the story. It may be similar to how actors can memorize and produce the lines for a lengthy period of time. Our brains can remember better if there is a storyline that you understand. There are mistakes typically made by novice interpreters, and I did make all of those mistakes at my earliest days. Those include, first, not having a memo pad and pen. A notepad and a pen are like security blanket for interpreters. Not only we always use them, but we also feel insecure without having them. Second, not interpreting in the first person. Always interpret as I, we, as opposed to he said that, she said that, or something like that. Remember that you are the speaker when you are interpreting. Third, not clarifying what the speaker meant, meaning, sorry, newer interpreters tend to interpret only what and where they understand and ignore the rest. In a consecutive mode, it's okay to ask the speaker clarification. It is much better than misinterpreting them. And remember, you can't interpret if you don't understand them. Fourth, underestimating the extent of preparation. Reading what is given by the client is often not enough. Seek out for information. Now, excuse me. Now, I'd like to give you an idea on life of interpreters. Now, there are several sources of jobs, such as Canadian, Japanese governments, Canadian and Japanese companies, conference organizers, Canadian, Japanese, or international interpretation agencies, colleagues, families, and friends. In my case, job locations are not often in Toronto, except for the past few years, 1 or 2 years, when the particular projects were going on in Toronto. So there are not many jobs in Toronto, not much happening. Mostly other Canadian and international locations are where I work. Sometimes interpreters' home locations dictate the type of jobs. For example, if you are in the US West Coast, there will be many IT assignments and some litigations. New York-based interpreters are mostly taking on financial, IR or investor relations, United Nations-related jobs or pharmaceutical jobs. And Canadian West, agriculture and IT are the main one, I believe. And in Toronto, it is a mixture. I'm lucky in this way because Toronto is a hub for many industries. So most of the jobs, or many of the jobs, are in the financial area, litigations, government-related, IT, and pharmaceutical. In Ottawa, mostly government assignments and IT, as there are quite extensive IT industry there. Some questions about interpreter license. There's no license for interpreters other than the one I introduced you, accreditation at the provincial level, federal level, or in the US, the State Department of Accreditation, and international level, IEC, which is extremely tough. So the life of interpreters could be lonely. It can be flexible, but we can't really control when to work. As there are no paid holidays, I am often afraid of planning for a week holiday, as I may lose a week of jobs and future opportunities. We don't have any boss, no unpleasant colleagues to work with every day, but have colleagues and clients in different locations. We must run our own business, do our bookkeeping, invoices, and booking, etc. We need to set an appropriate fee structure for ourselves based on own capability and what the market can support. As I mentioned, you have to figure out, you have to speak to many different people and probably investigate what kind of fees are being charged by interpretation agencies, and that will give you some kind of idea. So we need to be independent, tough, and strong, and a good businessman. Since this talk today is organized by the Japan Foundation, I would like to touch on some cultural aspect as well. In many circumstances, interpreters need to bridge cultural gaps. Speakers' statements often reflect their cultural background. For example, Canadians, they are very polite, thoughtful of others, diplomatic, and modest. Japanese, they are very polite, modest, not very good at expressing their thoughtfulness, even though they are, tend to convey the points only, often not very diplomatic in their statements. Japanese social norms are different, and the way they show their thoughtfulness is more subdued. Interpreters may sometimes add some social lubricant. And under some circumstances and in certain kind of meetings, interpreters may add some diplomatic words in English to keep the atmosphere positive. In certain consecutive assignments, interpreters can act as a culture and communication lubricant, but again, do not overdo it. For example, you could say, "Thank you for the explanation." Or if a Japanese speaker is repeating or not seem to have understood what English speaker said, you could say, "As you have mentioned," just not to offend them. We can advise the client on culturally appropriate or inappropriate communication behaviors as necessary. It is not seen much these days, but about 30 years ago, I had some expressions of sexual harassment from Japanese visitors. In interpretation, try to explain a word in the context or explain a word that cannot be translated in one word in another language going into. There are some English words that do not have exact corresponding words in Japanese. About 20 years ago, I remember there was no Japanese word that can translate ensure in English, which appeared in many governmental documents. After a while, I began seeing tampo suru as the word for word translation for ensure, the English word ensure in Japanese. This word, tampo, is usually used as a security or mortgage. So I suspect that the Japanese word was devised and developed to be a convenient translation for ensure. English is generally more specific and concrete language than Japanese, but have some convenient and unspecific words as well, such as to address. When used together with programs such as address programs, which is usually translated as 対処する or 対応する in Japanese. What troubles interpreters often are sayings, proverbs, slangs, and jokes. When you hear sayings, proverbs, or slangs, do not attempt literal translation. For example, pie in the sky, which is in Japanese, eni kaeta mochi, meaning it is very unlikely to be realized. Any kaeta mochi is really a Japanese sweet on paper, drawn on paper. So it's interesting in both cases. The idioms have a popular treat in respective culture. Another one is break into jail or boketsu horu. This Japanese boketsu horu means digging a hole for your own tomb. So break into jail is the opposite of break out of jail, meaning admitting guilt or ending up putting yourself in trouble. Jokes are very difficult to be conveyed. If the audience do not share the cultural background, jokes do not convey very well. So advise speakers not to use too many culturally specific jokes if it's possible. Okay. I think there are many questions on fees. Again, it is very difficult to speak on particular fees, but another question is for all interpretation companies said how to understand the trending rate price for interpretation assignments. I don't know if this person has an interpretation company, but as I said, you can do some such research on of the published information on Google or internet. That would be the only way, or speak to other interpreters or other agent if it's possible. But extensive discussion of fees is considered to be price fixing, so you have to be careful if you have a company. Japanese is a high context language and represent high context culture. Japanese speakers share the culture, history, values, norms, and therefore their speaking tends to be vague and implicit. English, particularly American English, is low context language, representing a low context culture. It is a country of immigrants, and people need to speak out to be understood and heard. Therefore, English speakers tend to be more straightforward, frank, and explicit compared to Japanese speakers. Canadian English may not be as explicit as American English, definitely more apologetic and modest, reflecting the culture. And British English reflects also its distinctive culture. I find British English speakers in international conferences have deep knowledge and pride in history and other liberal arts fields, which may be reflecting their education. Lastly, I would like to touch on the possible future of interpretation. Many more meetings are held virtually, both in simultaneous and consecutive modes. Therefore, meetings are getting shorter and more frequent, such as every week or every other week. There are new interpretation agency players emerging who offer hourly virtual interpretation services at a much lower costs. Partly due to the declining population and trading conditions, Japanese companies have become increasingly global in their business, which created more demands, particularly after the pandemic. Although starting this year, things are slowing down, possibly due to the turmoil created at the south of the border. More Japanese businessmen can speak English pretty well, but still use interpreters for discussing more complicated issues. That also means if you're not a good interpreter, they will know. Some companies and organizations attempted to use AI for simultaneous interpretation to save costs, but so far the results were disastrous. Speakers tend to speak very fast, omitting the subject and the object in the case of Japanese speakers, and they don't exactly explain the context. AI cannot interpret fast enough and accurate enough so far. Even if they do, it will be difficult for the audience to read the translation real time for half a day or all day unless the AI can also produce perfect voice interpretation. Low-level interpretations may be replaced by AI sooner And many Japanese businessmen will not be needing a low level interpretation in the near future, the very near future. I think this is already happening. Therefore, I would say the higher the interpretation skills are, the more future proof to be enjoyed. As an example of the latter case, I heard German interpreters' jobs are diminishing as many more Germans can communicate in English. French is one of the two official languages in many international organizations, and so far, French interpreters' jobs are more protected. This concludes my presentation, and thank you so much for bearing with me for a long time. I hope the information is of some use in your future decision making in your career or advancing your career in the interpretation field. I would welcome your comments and questions either in Japanese or English. I'm sorry I could not read many of your questions, so I'm hoping that the Japan Foundation will help me to select some questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bond, for that wonderful presentation and also the very interactive discussion that you had with our audiences who are watching at home. Um, we do have, we do have a couple of questions on our chat box. So, as you can see on the screen, let us go through them one by one. So, first we have a question from Clisha Bernice, who says, "Thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights. How did you feel when you had your first freelance translation opportunity?"
Um, I studied as a freelance interpreter in Tokyo. At that time, you will know my age probably, but I was in the height of the bubble world in the 1980s, late 80s. So there are plenty of job opportunities for a very much beginner interpreter like myself. So I was very fortunate. So just have as many experiences as possible, as many jobs as possible. When you start interpreter's journey as a profession, just don't choose what you like and what you don't. Take all the opportunities as much as you can to brush up and accumulate your experience, I think.
So much.
Yeah. So yes, I registered with quite a few interpretation agencies in Tokyo, and they gave me jobs. So I don't have to go out and take jobs myself. I just was given some jobs. Same for translation as well. Just sign up with some agencies.
Okay, so here is another question from Creative Colony. They say that in consecutive interpretation, as interpreters, we have the opportunity to seek verification from the speaker when they use one of those chameleon phrases. What do you do when in simultaneous mode?
Oh, okay. I think I already answered this question.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Okay. It's okay.
Okay, there seem to be a couple of questions about artificial intelligence, so maybe I'll
Mhm.
show them on the screen. So the first is, do you think that interpreter or translator's job may be replaced by AI in the future? What is the advantage of human over AI?
Um, I think at certain level, probably lower to mid-level, interpreter's job could be replaced by AI. But as you know, AI still do some hallucinations, and AI is not perfect. AI cannot read people's expressions on their face, gestures, and there's so many visual information that live human can get, and
Mhm.
also the tone of the speakers. We can see whether they're happy or not happy or irritated. Those emotions. It would be very hard for AI to catch all those. And even if the clients decided to use AI, there will be a human interpreter sitting beside AI probably and checking the AI's interpretation. I think that I can see that for foreseeable future, maybe 20 years from now, maybe they are still doing that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, to note that human beings can't so easily be overtaken by AI, but this person here is asking that just in case the worst possible scenario happens, what other field can interpreters and translators work in the future, according to you?
um, Depends on your experience. I was fortunate. I think I was fortunate that I have some experience working for Japanese, American companies, and government offices. Definitely having another experience other than interpreter's field is a plus. I also work as a consultant. That's because I have some extra experiences and then also accumulate through interpretation jobs. So, um, you know, be greedy in terms of accumulating your experience and exposure. Take all the opportunities that you have.
So much for sharing that. There are a couple of people who are very interested in learning more about your experiences. So here is a question about how much experience did you have, or how much time had passed until you felt confident enough to translate or interpret in your non-native languages?
In my case, I studied English literature. Of course, I was a bad student and didn't go to university, typical university students in Japan. But as soon as I started working for a Japanese company, I was placed in the overseas sales department. So I was extensively working with English, translating, reading English magazines and information. And so throughout my work experience in Japan, I was always using English. So I gradually accumulated my skills and my experience. It's hard to say.
I think this is pretty similar to that question. And this person also asks, when did you feel like you were ready to enter this field? Was there a specific point in time in your life when you felt like you were ready?
Um, as I mentioned, I became interpreter by default. I seeked for another opportunities when I came to Canada, but my English wasn't that great. Although I was able to speak English, and I didn't have any Canadian experience, as I you already know. And also, the only option that I had was to work for a Japanese company, which I wasn't really interested in. So, the easiest thing for me to do was to work as a freelance interpreter. So I signed up with, Canadian Toronto-based interpretation agencies and gradually accumulated my experience. But I would say if you, I don't know, I don't know if I would recommend you to become a professional interpreter unless you really like this job, which is really fun. But younger people have many more opportunities, so explore those first, and then if you can't find anything else, become an interpreter. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. Sorry.
Here's another question. They would like to know what you would have liked to have studied to make your job or journey easier so far.
um, I briefly went to some simultaneous interpretation school in Japan, which was helpful, but it wasn't really a formal multiple year experience. So I would definitely recommend you if you're young and if you're interested in working or living and studying in Japan, just go to Japan and go to one of those agencies to be trained as a professional interpreters. Also, Monterey Institute in California is a great place to learn, but I would think that the tuition is extremely expensive there. But any kind of study is very helpful. Um, I briefly studied international relations at one of the UK universities virtually, just trail end of the COVID period. It was very, very interesting. It was very helpful when you do any political or international conferences. The international relations is truly, truly valuable. My job got really busy, so I have to quit and after a few months, but I'm really regretting. But any kind of special education, either, even in math, that would be helpful too.
So I believe this person is an aspiring interpreter. So they ask, what steps would you recommend to improve one's ability to be concise when interpreting from English to Japanese?
From English to Japanese, I have to say, based in North America, Japanese interpreters, mainly going from English to Japanese. So Japanese proficiency is very, very important. As I mentioned, English is not my mother tongue. And then, so it is not easy for me to speak in English. But if you speak English for me and maybe for you, Japanese, a lot, and in a daily basis, then it gradually becomes much easier. It's like babies learning a language. The more you speak, the better you get. So first, you have to increase your language proficiency, and then after that, you just constantly read widely and read many materials both in English and Japanese, so you can substitute. Um, you know, Probably if your not language skill is not sufficient, you can substitute that with your knowledge and experience.
Thank you. Here is another question about your work in interpretation. So, this question asks, are there people who are easier or harder to work with? And what are the differences?
Yes, I assume that this question is about the speakers. Difficult speakers are those whose voice are so small and they don't have very clear logic in their speaking, and then they just speak long, repeating themselves and just go so long. And also the speakers who does not clarify the subject and object, because as an interpreter we have to figure out what the object is, what the subject is, and then fill the gap or information when we reproduce Japanese into in English. So so the easiest person to interpret for, in, if it's a Japanese person, the Japanese who can speak English can produce very good Japanese because they know what information is necessary to be translated in English.
Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple more questions. So, our next question is, how do you deal with the perpetual need to study all kinds of subject matter? Do you feel curious and happy to learn about everything?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I love studying. That is because probably I was forcing myself to study um, to compete with others for the high school examination, university entrance examination in Japan, which was very hard when I was in the middle of that. But looking back, that experience really helped me to be more disciplined. I can force myself to study and do some researches, even if I don't really want to. So that discipline, you really do need it. Whether you're really too busy, you're too tired, you just have to do that. I like learning all sorts of things happening in the world, so I enjoy studying.
It does seem like studying is a pretty permanent part of your job as an interpreter. So,
Definitely.
I have a couple of questions for you, if I may ask, while we wait for anyone, if they have any more questions, to please write it in the chat. Do you have anything that you enjoy the most about your career as an interpreter?
Um, Again, I like studying, and also each job opportunity is a learning opportunity. When I go out to work or even I do virtual meeting, I learn a lot, many different areas, and also I can meet many different people and I can go to many different places. So I truly enjoy being an interpreter.
a couple more questions. Um, when you come across unknown words or expressions, how do you take care of them?
How did you take up them? If it's a consecutive assignment, I probably will ask the speakers and do clarification if it's important. If it's not, I probably ignore it. But I don't know if this question is about technical expressions or just slangs or something. It really depends. For example, break into jail. I didn't understand what he said, but that was in the simultaneous mode. So I just guessed from the context what he wanted to say. But after that, during the break time, I checked what it means, and then after that, it was okay.
Here we have one more question. The English portion of it says, would we learn to be a general interpreter first and focus on specific industry, or learn both simultaneously?
Um, Depends. Depends on your background, or depends whether you will be company in-house interpreter. In that case, you will be studying, more intensely in the field where the company is. Um, in my case, I studied in the automotive industry, so my experience and knowledge in the auto industry was a little bit more than in any other field. But as you challenge and go into and take on a new assignment, and if this assignment is such in the field of such as nuclear power plant or physics or chemistry, then each job is a learning opportunity, and you can deepen and widen your knowledge in that particular field as you go.
Thank you. So it seems that those are all our questions for now. We are also almost out of time, so that is perfect on timing. It was a great discussion. Thank you everyone for asking the questions. Just to conclude this Q&A, I would like to ask one last question to you, which would be, do you have any additional comments or advice for individuals who are wanting to become an interpreter?
Well, I didn't mention anything technical today. So if you are doing any virtual assignment, please use a headset just like this. The Jabra or Sennheiser, and those are really good makes, and also Logitech has good ones as well. If you're interested in more technical portion, I will be happy to share with you some information. But please be patient. You cannot become a good interpreter or experienced interpreter overnight. It takes years and years and years. In my case, decades.
Thank you so much once again, Miss Bond. That was
Thank you.
incredibly interactive, and we surely hope that everyone here in the audience learned a lot from you today. We are very thankful to you for sharing your valuable insights and experiences, and we really appreciate it.
Thank
Appreciate
you
your
very
time.
much. Thank you very much.
And for everyone watching, thank you so much for tuning in and following along. I would once again like to request you to please fill in our feedback questionnaire. A link for this is in the description box below and will also be sent to you via email afterwards. We will also be posting this live stream on our YouTube channel. If you wish to revisit anything from the session today or share it with other aspiring interpreters as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we wish you a good evening ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your comments and questions.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.